In the name of God, Creator, Redeemer, and Sustainer. Amen. You may be seated. Hello, brother sun on the outside. Greetings, sister sky. Hello, humans, furry creatures, all creatures of our good God and King. Welcome. You are all God's beloved. I imagine this is something like what St. Francis might do on his average greeting to everyone he meets and everywhere he goes. He was known for being this person that sought to embody God's love and following in the way of Jesus, of pursuing that love to the greatest extent possible. As a 13th century follower of Jesus, he gave up incredible privilege. He belonged to a wealthy family, a wealthy Italian family, a merchant, and he could have had an easy life. Really nice path. Everything was set up for him. Access to the best education, the best luxury items, property, you name it, right? St. Francis, or prior to being a saint, right, Giovanni, then Francesco, as he was then later named, could have had it all, much like the man in today's gospel, right? Eat, rest, drink, be merry, all is well with you. You have been given the good things in life. But St. Francis wasn't satisfied with that. He didn't see that as the true way of Jesus. He went out into the town and he saw beggars. He experienced poverty himself when he went out and served as a soldier, and later was arrested and then had to beg on the streets with others. And he began to experience the suffering of humanity for himself and was converted to Christ. For he saw that God truly wanted there to be no beggars. God wanted all of humanity and all of God's beloved to live in a form of reconciliation and belonging so that everyone had the means to survive. But he knew that wasn't the way of the world. The great powers, the property, his own family lineage, he knew that that was at odds with the political and economic systems of his day. Sound familiar? And so he sought just to provide and show the way through his own example. And people thought he was crazy for it. Like, isn't this the guy that, so-and-so, right? The wealthy landowner's son. But yet, he rejected all of that. And through that, began to model a way of life that would call greater and greater numbers of people in the 13th century to conversion, to this way of life and to this way of proclamation of God's love for all. And for that, he became known as this beggar who wore this just tunic and walked around barefoot and began greeting, and praising God's creation, much like I did at the beginning, praising the sun, praising the moon, honoring, blessing the animals, seeing that they all sort of belonged in God's ecosystem of love and creation. But one of the most impressive stories that I've found about St. Francis is this story of early examples of interfaith peacemaking and justice-seeking. For St. Francis lived during a time of great religious, political conflict, and those two things went together. During the Fifth Crusades, when European Christians were trying to reclaim the city of Jerusalem. Jerusalem had been controlled by Muslims for some 500 years. And of course, they were trying to reclaim it by means of violence. It was a fight over to see who had the greater God. And so St. Francis witnessed this and was horrified by the treatment of people. He was horrified by the language that his Christian brethren used to describe Muslims, and he sought to find a different way, and the way that Jews were treated in his context as well. And, the traditional way of action was you have to profess obedience to the crown, to the king, and to the correct God, or else you die, right? St. Francis was interested in trying a different way. And again, he was seen as crazy for trying to do this. But he managed to find his way and travel with the Fifth Crusade from Italy to the coastline of Egypt, where the Sultan Al-Qamir held his camp. Somehow he managed to cross enemy lines with just him and a brother friar. They were promptly captured and arrested, but he pleaded to the soldiers that arrested him, and they saw that he carried no weapons, that he wasn't a soldier. He was merely in his tunic, and they're again wondering, who the heck is this guy and what does he want? And he said he simply wanted to deliver a message of peace to the Sultan and to seek to pray for him and to demonstrate the true gospel, which was of love. And so he was somehow given permission to see the Sultan and had this chance encounter with this powerful ruler. Again, there's all kinds of different accounts about what actually happened in that conversation, but from what to the best of our understanding, the Sultan was quite impressed and a little bit astounded both by the stupidity and the authenticity, right? Both things together. The authentic love that he experienced from this St. Francis. And, Sultan's council of advisors told him, he asked, what do I do with this guy? What is your recommendation? Does he have authentic teaching? And, of course, their answer was, he must be beheaded, right? This was the way of handling things, right? But Sultan didn't do that. He actually said, no, against my own teaching, against my own council of advisors, I order you to grant him permission and give him safe passing back to his people. And some say that whole interaction changed the course of that war between Christians and Muslims. It didn't end right away, but it ended sooner than it would have, and it ended differently because of this encounter. So what do we make of this St. Francis for our context and time? Some of you may know Richard Rohr, who is a writer, a Franciscan, contemplative, mystic, and activist. He brings together this idea of contemplation and action, and how our faith is really called to sort of be at that center place. He speaks of St. Francis and the kind of mystical, urgent faith that he lived out as the downward way. The downward way in the way of Jesus. And it requires a deep inner strength and an inner knowing to follow this way, because again, it's contrary to everything that our systems, our political systems, our economic systems, our religious systems, which are all about domination, power, wealth, importance, right? Titles, a power over, right? An authoritarian power over that we're seeing being exercised in our politics, right? That are challenging the very fabric of our democracy, the very fabric of our human relationships. Everything is becoming polarized in this way. St. Francis, following in this way of Jesus, following in the teaching of today's gospel, where we're being called to give up the excess, because it doesn't belong to us. It is God's creation, right? And it is to be shared. Rather than a power over, this Jesus, this St. Francis, is calling us to a shared power, a power with. Richard Rohr speaks of it as this power and this solidarity rooted in the love of Christ with the pain of the larger world. Jesus stood with that pain and that suffering of the larger world and held it in his body up to the point of crucifixion. Being Christian today, it's not a requirement, right? Is anyone being forced to be here today? I don't know, maybe some of you are. Is anyone being here against their will? As if you are. Yeah, you know, my wife makes me come every month. But in reality, most of us, right, we have free will. We are choosing to be here, right? We are choosing to be Christian, to seek to be followers of Jesus of Nazareth. What do we do with that choice in our current context and time? How do we express and live this very challenging way of Jesus, this gospel that we heard today, this crazy peasant monk that gave up everything and just wanted to proclaim God's love, especially amongst the most marginalized of our community? This is challenging stuff. But if we choose to try and walk in this way, then we can go back out into the world and into our jobs and into our relationships and in small ways begin to instill a different way of being, of knowing, and acting in the world. And I believe that these small things begin to have ripple effects and build and compound, like compounded interest, but it's compounded interest of love, right? Of love in action, which over time, I believe, can truly change the world. We might not see it right now, but if we are committed to this Jesus thing, right? If we are committed to being this Episcopal branch of the Jesus movement, as our former presiding bishop, Michael Curry, used to say, right? If it's not of love, right, it's not of God. That's what he was known for saying, right? This loving, righteous presence, loving action. Not for self-importance, right? Not for self-aggrandizement. Not for power or wealth or access to the VIP lounge, right? But this way where when we have something to share, when we have more than enough, we give it away freely, right? And then we recognize that there are so many people that have been refused even the crumbs, where people are being dehumanized just because of the color of their skin or because of their lack of proper documentation. People are being criminalized left and right. Right? St. Francis also cared about all of creation and the planet. Right? Our planet is being desecrated. Right? We are in increasing forms of ecological devastation. And yet, again, we have people in power saying that climate change is a hoax. How do we bring in the way of St. Francis that tries to hold it all together, tries to hold the love of our fellow human, the love of the planet, and take care of this fragile earth, our home, the only home that we know, and create a world where everyone can really belong? Where everyone can really belong, where everyone's human dignity is recognized and seen, where diversity and difference is celebrated and is seen as part of the fabric of God's love. That rainbow that comes down from the sky that reminds us of God's promise, right? God is in all and with all. And we got work to do to make it true, friends. In the spirit of St. Francis, may it be so. May we try in small ways until it becomes a giant ripple effect of love. Amen.